Thanks for joining me on episode 387 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hey, I'm Nick Pavlidis from the Confessions of a Terrible Husband podcast. I challenge you to not be a terrible husband or wife or friend like me by being intentional about stewarding your relationships. One way to be inspired to be a better husband is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
That underlying emotion, that is a sense of faith. And when you begin to develop that, when you begin to look outward from yourself and look to your neighbor and look to the people around you and try to figure out, how can I help them? How can I provide for them? What can I do to care for the people around me and help support them and grow them and allow them?
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's Spiritual Foundation episode about developing your influence, I talk with you about why faith and hope can give us peace, how peace, like happiness, isn't something we have, but something we are, and how you can begin to develop both for yourself and for others a sense of being at peace through a few actions of faith. You know, when I'm working with clients, one of the things that I look for is the why behind what they're doing, the real reason behind their goals. You know, all too often people will have a goal like getting out of debt or getting better with their time or running their own business or starting to be able to do something else than what they've done before. But as they come up with these goals, with these ideas, these task-driven things, the things that at the end of the day you can check off a box and say, yes, it's done, sometimes they forget to examine the why behind it. What's the reason behind what they're doing? And all too often, when we really examine those reasons, a lot of times they come down to wanting a sense of peace, a sense of security, a sense of happiness in our lives. And so we begin to look for the things that we can do that will give us those emotions. What can we do to create peace? What can we do to create happiness? What can we do to create freedom? But often the truth is that it's not about what we do, or at least not only about what we do. It's also about who we are. It's about who we are at our core. It's a heart problem as much as it is a head and an action problem. And I've talked before about how action creates belief that then creates more action, and it can become a feedback loop in a positive or a negative direction depending on what you're doing. And this is another one of those things that can do that. As you begin to get more peace, you will act more peaceful, which will give you more peace. If, on the other hand, you have less peace in your life, more chaos, then you will begin to act in ways that add to that chaos, add to that frustration, add to that feeling of non-peace. Faith and hope are often two core foundational things that begin to give us that sense of peace. See, the truth is, when we don't have hope, when we don't believe that tomorrow might just be a little better than today, it's really hard to be at peace. It's hard to have a sense of accomplishment, a sense of calmness about you whenever you're constantly worried that tomorrow is going to be worse than today. Hope is one of those things that begins to let us believe that tomorrow may actually be better than today. And out of that sense of hope comes a feeling of peace. By the same token, faith, which, by the way, let me be careful here and define this. Faith does not necessarily mean that you belong to any sort of particular church or particular religion. Faith, in fact, doesn't even necessarily require you to participate in a religion or an organized worship service. Faith is about this belief that there are things out there that you cannot understand, that are bigger and beyond your ken, beyond your ability to grasp, and that those things, that higher power, the universe, nature, karma, whatever name you want to give it, is actually something that you can plug into, and you can't understand it, but you can experience it. You can feel it. You can sense it down deep in your heart and your soul and your spirit. It's the thing that sometimes helps us do the right thing, even when the right thing is the hard thing. It's the belief not of punishment, but of the fact that the world is set up in a way where doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is worth it. That underlying emotion, that is a sense of faith. And when you begin to develop that, when you begin to look outward from yourself and look to your neighbor and look to the people around you and try to figure out, how can I help them? How can I provide for them? What can I do to care for the people around me and help support them and grow them and allow them to live a little better life today than they did yesterday? Then what happens is you develop within yourself a bigger sense of peace, a bigger sense of hope, a bigger sense of gratitude. You begin to become more selfless and less selfish, and that gives you more peace. There are specific things you can look for, and these can be things that you develop in yourself, but they can also be things that you can help others find. See, in coaching, one of the things I do is help people uncover their why. And one of the reasons I do it is because as they uncover it, that's what gives them a sense of peace and belonging. So some of the things that you can help guide people to, or that you can develop in yourself, realize that you don't have anything to prove. It's okay to be motivated. It's okay to be driven, but out of that same drive needs to be a sense of commitment and contentment. So it's not just about getting more done. It's not about being better than the person next to you. It's not about overcoming the flaws and the things in your past that perhaps beat you up and held you down. It's simply about doing the best you can for yourself and for others. Out of that, there's a need to learn to be at peace with yourself, to learn to be still. Whether that comes through meditation, through prayer, or all of the above, this sense of communing with the higher power is part of developing faith and part of beginning to develop a sense of peace. So what can you do to create that for yourself and for the people around you? Forgiveness is another important step. The ability to look at people who have hurt you, to look at people who are around you, and to recognize the fact that even if they hurt you, that may not have been their intent. And even if it was their intent, you have the ability to forgive them. Remember, forgiving does not mean forgetting. It doesn't mean being a wishy-washy person who allows yourself to be set up for harm. It's about letting go of the things that you can't control anyway and moving past them and beyond them. Also, master the understanding and the belief and the idea that you don't have to control the entire world. This was a tough one for me. This idea that someone can choose to do something or to be something, even something that hurts themselves, something that I would not do, and maybe even something I would not wish for them to do if it's someone I care about, someone that I hope has the best in the world and the best in their life, and yet it's not my job to make them do anything. It's not my job to change them. It's not my job to fix them. It's my job to walk beside them, to guide them, to love on them. That's my job. And not having to control that, not having to take on that burden is freeing. And lastly, you have to recognize and forgive yourself too. You have to recognize that you're not perfect and nothing in the world is truly perfect. The God that we worship is perfect, but nothing that we face in the day-to-day world really ever achieves perfection. And that's okay. we should be striving towards perfection, but that doesn't mean we ever reach it. It's a goal that comes without end, because there's always a next step. There's always something else you could do. There's always something else that you can step forward and do for your friend, for your neighbor, and for your God. And out of that sense of drive and contentment at the same time will come a sense of faith, of hope, and of peace. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor. Go over to facebook.com/inspired stewardship and like our Facebook page and mark it that you'd like to get notifications from us so that we can connect with you on Facebook and make sure that we're serving you to the best of our abilities with time and tips there. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.